Continuing on from the last video and our generalizations from the human capital model, earnings differentials also make a difference in whether someone will make the investment in college or not. And you can see this by going back to our Melinda example. I've reset it so it's the original example. And let's say that the earnings differential is higher. So right now she's got a 21% internal rate of return. That was higher than the 10% discount rate, so it was a good investment. Well, let's make this a little better. Let's say that in the first year, instead of $3,000 in incremental earnings, she's going to get $4,000. Notice it goes up. Maybe in year 2, instead of $4,000, she's going to get $5,000. Internal rate of return goes up. Again, maybe in year 3, instead of $5,000, she gets $6,000 incremental earnings. It goes up again. The point is that if in each of the years of work that we get those incremental earnings, they're higher, then the investment in education becomes more efficient. These earnings differentials that we see between college students and high school graduates vary across countries and across time. Let's take a look at some data here. This is earnings premium in percentage terms across several OECD countries. The United States has a very high earnings premium. It's 69%. In effect, college students on average make about 69% more than high school graduates. Then it's pretty impressive for Germany as well. Starts to drop off as we get to the UK, Australia, and then it's much lower in Denmark and Sweden. There are many factors that could be contributing to these broad differences, say between the United States and the Scandinavian countries. But we want to keep in mind that the job markets themselves are going to exhibit different levels of income inequality. For example, in the U.S., higher wage workers make a lot more than lower wage workers. There's a lot of income inequality. And so college graduates are more likely to get those higher income jobs, and high school graduates or less are likely to get those lower paying jobs. So the college degree is really just reflecting the larger inequality that exists in the system. Whereas in the Scandinavian countries, you have less of that kind of polarization between the higher paying jobs and the lower paying jobs. So you don't get as much of a discrepancy between college graduates and non-college graduates. That's one explanation, but there's many other factors that come into play when we compare different countries. College attendance rose in the 1980s as the college-high school premium increased. And you can see that if we look at this data here. On the vertical axis, we have the ratio of college earnings to high school graduate earnings. And it's broken down by gender. So if you go back to, say, 1973, you'll notice for men, you had about a 1.4 ratio. What does that mean? It means that college graduates made 1.4 times high school graduates, which effectively means that college graduates made 40% more than high school graduates. That continued to grow, and today is much closer for males to 2 and for females 1.8. So today a college degree could mean 2 times the annual income as a high school graduate. And so that premium we need to explain and understand why it's growing so much. And here's where you can see it really taking off in the early 80s. You have college attendance rising in response to these higher premiums. A few things to consider here. First, the 1970s decline. This is likely a result of the baby boomers. These were people born in the late 40s, and they showed up as a large labor supply around this period. Remember, if you were born in, let's say, 1950, By 1970, you were 20. By 75, you were 25. So you were in your working years. And because there was such a high birth rate in that post-World War II era of the late 40s, we see a large worker supply relative to demand in this period, driving down those college premiums. Then you get the 1980s rise. This is most explicable by recognizing demand exceeded supply for college-educated workers. We can see that college workers started to make more because college education was a vehicle for getting a job in the rapidly growing tech industries. What we know today as the information age or the tech boom really started in the 80s. And these workers of that period that went and got an education were much more viable in that industry than otherwise. At the same time, you had the demand less than supply for high school graduates. This was lowering high school grad incomes because companies started hiring college grads to fill jobs not historically requiring a degree. It's kind of ironic, but when more people get a degree, firms often start to look at the degree not just for the skills it conveys, but as a way of distilling people for jobs that may not require a degree. Example, you might have companies, even today, that look at a college degree and they say, I've got a job available, I need to hire someone, but they don't really need a college degree. In other words, the degree itself is not going to give them a skill set that will make them more productive in my business. But there's so many college grads out there that I'm going to require a degree. Because a degree does say something. It says that you were willing to make an investment in human capital. It says that you were, ambitious enough to go to school and take notes. You can probably learn things well. You're willing to undergo the stress of tests and so forth. And so it does mean something, even if you didn't learn, economics in your degree program, or you didn't learn accounting in your degree program. I might still use a degree as a means of determining who to hire because I think the degree conveys things beyond just those skill sets. And so the belief is that this is what happened to high school grad. They started seeing the jobs that they would ordinarily fill going to college grads and driving down effectively their wages. So what about future wage premiums for college graduates? Well, if you look at the trend here, it appears that we would continue to see an increase in the wage premiums. But that's not a given. The past is not always indicative of the future. And there are structural changes that could occur in the supply and demand conditions for educated workers. For example, a lot of this growth in the college wage premium came from growth in high-tech industries, which looked at colleges and the degree as having value compatible with their production. If the economy were to shift into other types of production, or even if the high-tech industries got subdued a bit, we could see a decrease in the demand for educated workers. On the supply side, more people are getting degrees. As that occurs, you potentially have a decrease in the value of those degrees. Remember, in order for wages to go up, the demand must outpace the supply. If we run into a situation in the future where the demand is dropping and the supply is increasing, there's only one outcome that would occur, and that's a decrease in wages for college graduates. It's not a given, but neither is this nice upward trajectory we've seen over the past several decades. Finally, the perceived value of a degree also matters. If a degree is perceived by employers as implying knowledge, aptitude, ambition, then they're going to be willing to pay a premium to get those workers. But if it doesn't convey those abilities, then firms may move away from degrees, and they may look for alternative sources of human capital. This could mean in-house training. This could mean assessments to determine who is competent for a job and who is not competent for a job. It also could open the door for more vocationally specific type training programs. Regardless, we want to be aware that future college premiums are uncertain. Now let's talk about education, allocation, and efficiency. We know efficient allocation means getting the most out of your resources. And when it comes to investment in education, that is human capital, we know that it's efficient if the internal rate of return exceeds alternative investments. For a business, they have to look at alternative investments such as physical capital and technology. Many lines of production can be done with human beings and the knowledge that they bring, but those same lines of production could be done with machinery, physical capital, or technology. I refer back to the grocery store where that production, cashier, could be done with a person, but in many cases now it's being done with physical capital, the machine, and its embedded technology. So firms have to make the decision about how to allocate resources to get the most benefit. If we can get a 10% return on a human capital investment and an 8% return on a physical capital investment, we should redirect resources away from the physical capital investment towards a human capital investment. For example, if a firm says, well, we can train a worker to do job A, or we can purchase a machine to do job A, if we train the worker, we're going to get a 10% return on that investment. If we buy the machine, we're going to get an 8% return on that investment. Well, it'd be better to train the worker, get the 10% return, give up the 8% return, and have a most efficient allocation. Business and government allocations are only efficient when they base their decisions on these calculations. And even though the individual typically makes a decision as to whether to get a college education or not, as we're going to see, firms make the decision as to on-the-job training. How much do they want to invest in the worker and their abilities, their future abilities to do the job? If the return is sufficiently high, then they will do that. If not, then it might be more optimal for the business to consider physical capital or technology. Externalities. In our analysis of this human capital model, we want to acknowledge that there is a private perspective and a social perspective. The private perspective considers private costs and benefits only. Your decision, for example, to get a college education is based on the private benefits to you, and whatever that means, higher income, more comfortable job that is more aligned with your innate talents and interests, etc., etc. So you think of all of those private benefits, and then the private costs. How much do you have to pay to go to the school? How much are the textbooks? What are you giving up in terms of indirect costs in that alternative job while you're going to school? Again, private costs. Private benefits and costs are those that you experience, and those are the ones that are used to make the decision as to allocation. But this social perspective is there, and it's just not part of the decision making. For example, when you get an education, there are social benefits. Lower unemployment rates in the economy, decreased crime, reduced dependency on others, increased political participation, superior home environment for children, innovation, research, the list goes on. You probably didn't consider most of these as the benefits of getting a college degree, of making that investment. But these are benefits, whether they accrue to you or to society as a whole. Of course, there are also external costs that accrue from education. Distance and disconnected families. People often travel to go to school. They move far away from their loved ones. And then they may get jobs that are nationally determined, and they may have to relocate away from those that are closest to them. Higher taxes to subsidize education, and even higher unemployment rates. It may sound odd that college pursuit would lead to higher unemployment rates, but think about the people that don't go to college. When you have this separation of those that have a degree versus those that don't are often experiencing higher unemployment rates than they otherwise would. The point is, an efficient allocation of resources towards human capital would occur if we take into account the social perspective. But the individual is in charge of this decision to get an education, and so they only consider the the private perspective. Thus,